is because at the end of the day, America is going to want a president who is a decent human being, who doesn't shit on other people, who has some interest in the American people, some interest in something beyond himself. I think at the end of the day, people are going to reject this bigoted, divisive figure.
Give the answer to the question you're asking all night long. Why do they vote for Donald Trump? It's not always because they like him. No. It's because stuff like that is kookier to them.
Bill Maher just silenced Adam Schiff. And it wasn't even a fair fight. Bill Maher didn't just challenge Adam Schiff. He delivered one of the most devastating political takedowns in recent memory. In a jaw-dropping moment that left the audience and panel stunned, Maher dismantled Schiff's years-long narrative against Donald Trump using nothing but raw truth and hard facts. So what exactly went down on that stage? Why is this moment making waves and shaking up political circles? Let's break down the takedown, the unexpected twist, and the ripple effects that could rewrite the entire narrative.
I think it's true justice. The only thing he cares about is himself and money. And going after the money is a way to bring about some real justice.
Adam Schiff walked onto Bill Maher's stage brimming with confidence, arguably too much. Right out of the gate, he jumped into his usual refrain. Donald Trump is dangerous, divisive, and represents everything wrong with America, wrapped in an orange-tinged persona. We've all heard it before, but this time Schiff leaned in even harder. I think, at the end of the day, Schiff said, America's going to want a president who's a decent human being, someone who doesn't trash others and actually cares about the American people. As Schiff delivered his high-minded monologue, Maher remained silent, quietly preparing his counterstrike. He had heard enough, and what came next would flip the entire conversation, and the room on its head.
Pessimism about the general election. The reason why Joe Biden is going to beat Donald Trump is because at the end of the day, America is going to want a president who is a decent human being. Who doesn't shit on other people, who has some interest in the American people, some interest in something beyond himself. I think at the end of the day, people are going to reject this bigoted, divisive figure.
Schiff may have thought his message was landing, but the silence in the room told a different story. And Bill Maher? He was just getting started. While Schiff clung to the idea that moral decency was the answer to America's political problems, reality had already dealt his argument a blow. Donald Trump had pulled off one of the most dramatic comebacks in modern politics, leaving even his harshest critics stunned. Maher didn't need to shout. He didn't need to argue. This wasn't a debate, it was a reckoning. And Schiff had walked straight into it, completely unprepared for what was coming. But Maher wasn't the only one ready to respond. Another guest at the table was about to jump in, and he wasn't holding back.
I'm just getting tired of seeing so much stuff targeted in his direction, but somehow, some way he still survives. I mean, we're talking about a situation where he's still going to be the GOP nominee. He's still going to be running for president. You're President Biden. That's the individual that you're going to have to beat. 4 indictments, 91 counts. They ain't even bringing up the bankruptcies, ain't even bringing up this particular issue with this civil case, and somehow, some way, he puts cats to shame because he clearly has more than 9 lives.
Just when it seemed Schiff had taken all the heat he could handle, Stephen A. Smith jumped into the fray, and the intensity shot up a notch. Known for his fiery sports takes, Smith brought that same unfiltered energy to the political stage. But this wasn't theater. It was genuine frustration boiling over. Smith didn't hold back. He wasn't defending Trump. Far from it. He was calling out the Democratic establishment for throwing everything they had at him. Constant media attacks, multiple indictments, even comparisons to dictators. Yet despite it all, Trump only seemed to grow stronger. And that, Smith emphasized, was the real issue.
Atlantic put out an article last year, and it was called Separating Sports by Sex Doesn't Make Sense. Right. And talked about how we separate sports like the WNBA and just because it's just socialization. This is insane.
I agree.
Okay. That's why people vote for Trump. Mm-hmm. Because there's stuff like that on the left that people just go, I know Trump's horrible, but separating by sports by sex makes perfect sense. Mm-hmm. And if you think it doesn't, you can't lead the country.
As tension thickened in the room, Bill Maher didn't just aim his criticism at Schiff or the Democratic Party. He turned his sights on a deeper source of dysfunction, the mainstream media and cultural elite. Maher exposed a hard truth that many in power refuse to confront. Americans aren't clueless. They're watching. They see media narratives that defy logic, and they feel condescended to, if not outright insulted. Maher wasn't defending Trump. His message was a warning to the left. The overreach of woke culture, the obsession with symbolism over substance, and the non-stop wave of performative progressivism have real consequences. Voters don't make decisions based on Twitter drama. They vote based on what they live through, what keeps them up at night, and who they think actually gets it. Stephen A. Smith nodded in agreement. Schiff stayed silent, perhaps beginning to realize the problem wasn't Trump's resilience, but the left's disconnect from everyday Americans. And Maher wasn't done. He took direct aim at the crumbling credibility of the media, a shaky house of cards built on bias, now collapsing as even veteran journalists start questioning their own narratives. When the storytellers no longer believe the story, it's not just a media crisis. It's checkmate.
Schiff, given the ongoing political tensions and Trump's actions toward his critics, do you think President Biden's preemptive pardons turned out to be more important than initially expected? Let's first tell people what that means, preemptive pardons. That was pretty unprecedented, right? Before he left office, Joe Biden pardoned you and a number of people who he thought Trump would go after.
No, I take the opposite view. I don't think he should have given the pardons at all.
Really?
No, I don't think he should have, and I was vocal about that at the time.
Can you refuse a pardon?
That's less clear because in the case of the January 6th committee, he pardoned essentially the whole committee.
As if Adam Schiff hadn't already triggered enough political tripwires, the conversation suddenly veered into even more volatile territory. President Biden's preemptive pardons. Bill Maher brought it up in his usual laid-back style, but the question hit hard. Do you think those pardons ended up being more significant than people first realized? The energy in the room shifted. Schiff, clearly caught off guard, hesitated, then admitted he never supported the pardons in the first place. In doing so, he subtly threw Biden under the bus. It wasn't loud. It wasn't rebellious. But it was unmistakable. Because if the January 6th committee's findings were as solid and airtight as Schiff had long insisted, if the evidence was bulletproof, then why would a pardon even be necessary? Especially from someone like Schiff. His admission cracked the foundation. A man once seen as the moral compass of the anti-Trump movement now looked like he was quietly distancing himself from his own side's decisions. Intentional or not, Schiff had just undercut the very president who had shielded him politically. And Maher wasn't done. With surgical precision, he turned the spotlight on the media, the same media that had echoed Schiff's talking points for years without a second thought.
And so the FBI came in and arrested the judge. Now, I haven't heard that, maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think I've ever read arrested a judge. So is this significant?
Well, I think
I'm not going to comment on something I don't know more about than what you've just told me.
You read about it too.
Yeah, I mean, I read about it, but I don't know.
So you don't trust anything either, and you work for the New York Times.
Well,
Seated next to Schiff was New York Times columnist Bret Stephens, who made a jaw-dropping on-air admission. Even he no longer fully trusted the reporting from his own newspaper. Let that sink in. When veteran journalists start questioning the credibility of their own institutions, what does that signal to the average American? Maher didn't sugarcoat it. He laid it out clearly. Americans have stopped trusting the headlines. They're walking away from legacy media and turning to independent creators, podcasts, and alternative platforms. Not because they idolize Trump, but because they're tired of being manipulated, missiled, and talked down to. By the end, Schiff looked less like a crusader and more like a relic of a system on the brink, one built on narrative control, fear, and moral superiority. Now, that system is cracking from within. And if Democrats think the problem stops here, they haven't seen what's coming next.
Because Catholic schools are popular now, even with people who aren't Catholic, but it's the last place you can send your kid to get an old school education. And they just tell the kids, forget about the Jesus stuff. Just, to them, that's okay indoctrination, as opposed to some of the other indoctrination that goes on. And also, the Catholics don't put up with bullshit. They take your phone, you have to learn your P's and Q's and your grammar and all this kind of stuff. And that's what I just don't understand, that parents don't have the whip hand anymore. Not that you should actually use a whip. And I don't have kids, so I don't know that firsthand, but every movie and TV show that has a teenager in it cannot be mischaracterizing this. And the kids they don't listen to their parents, they turn their back on them, they walk out of the room, things that would just get me shut down when I was a kid.
By the time the segment wrapped, one thing was undeniable. Adam Schiff hadn't walked into a debate, he'd stepped into a reckoning. What began as a confident defense of decency and democracy quickly unraveled into a live demonstration of just how disconnected the political class has become. Bill Maher didn't just push back, he pulled the curtain wide open. He exposed the deep fractures running through the narrative that has dominated mainstream media and progressive politics for years. And Stephen A. Smith voiced what millions of Americans are feeling: frustration, fatigue, and a growing demand for truth over theatrics.
The fact that you don't share my pessimism, I truly do. I understand where you're coming from. But I think that's part of the problem. I think the Democratic Party should share my pessimism. I think they should be on high alert. I think they need to treat him with the seriousness that it deserves, because you having a lot of faith in the American people. The man did get over 74 million votes. You've got people that are looking at Joe Biden. I'm not going to call him a cognitive mess or anything like that. That's very disrespectful. I would never speak about our president that way. But when you're 82 years of age, it's not offensive to say you're no longer a spring chicken and you don't seem to have.
Adam Schiff may have walked off that set thinking he held his ground. But for viewers at home, the reality was clear. The old guard is losing its grip on the narrative. And if this moment proved anything, it's that truth has a way of pushing back. If this breakdown hit home, make sure to like, subscribe, and tap the bell so you don't miss what's coming next. Whether you're nodding along, yelling at the screen, or just here for the ride, we're only getting started. Thanks for watching. And remember, when everyone else sticks to the script, real truth echoes louder than ever.